Hello and welcome back everyone to our next panel, which is about refurbishing properties, a vanity investment or a way to drive up yield. The old saying goes that real estate sells itself. Does that still hold true in the present world, or can property managers drive up their rental yields by refurbishing properties? That is the core question that we want to talk about in this session. And let me introduce the speakers to you before they join. Hi, she joined already. So Eliza Liepina is responsible for alternative accommodations. Hi, Eliza. At Roundhill Capital, a market-leading real estate investment firm with more than 100,000 units under management. And also joining will be Jamie Stiff. Jamie is the head of CRM and agency at Loft, which provides a one-stop furnishing solution to the residential property sector, catering for niche markets and offering bespoke products and services. And until Jamie joins, I would suggest we start the conversation. Hi, Eliza, how are you? Oh, and there he is. Hi, Jamie.
Hey, everyone.
Hi. Good. Excited to, talk about all things refurbishment.
Likewise.
Good. And I mean, talking about refurbishment, let's do some clarification here. What do we mean by refurbishing a property, and why does it matter?
Cool. Well, the way that I look at sort of what that means is looking at kind of taking a property and refreshing it. So trying to essentially reduce your maintenance costs moving forward by updating the property, or you're adding convenience and adding to the property, and that is creating value, and therefore you should be able to increase your revenues or increase your rents, in other words. So that's how I look at sort of why it matters to refurbish your property, because you're always trying to essentially increase your yields. So that's how I think about it. Maybe Jamie has something to add.
No, I agree on all of that. I think one of the biggest factors is your primary reason for the investment and what would be the reason for refurbishing. And in terms of refurbishment itself, I think that can vary in different levels. I think you can have, a lot of works to be done in the beginning of a property to get it up to a certain level, or you can be doing a soft refurb, which can just take a yield to another level and open up a completely new tenant pool as well. So I think there's just the levels of refurbishment which can also have a big impact.
Okay, so before we move on with our questions, a reminder to all the attendees, you can ask questions to Eliza and Jamie by using Slido. Just click on the Slido tab in the chat and either ask questions or upvote existing questions. And as soon as we'll see questions popping up and being uploaded, we'll take them into our conversations. But before we go there, let's continue in our conversation. So we talked about how, that one way of, or one reason of doing it, or main reason, Eliza, you said it, is to increase yield. But what are the ways in which refurbishment impacts yield and how to actually accomplish it?
So the way that I always look at it is when you're refurbishing, and let's take the reducing of costs, right? So you're trying to reduce your maintenance costs moving forward. So what are the 5-10 things that cause the most issues in a rented property that then you have to constantly replace or mend in any type of way? And so the sort of 5-6 things that I always focus on is flooring. So you don't want to, as much as possible, you want to focus on wooden flooring, vinyl that you can clean easily, that won't break. Where carpets you often have to clean or, replace pieces of them, and they can be much harder to maintain moving forward. Things like wipeable paint helps a lot, so you don't have to repaint constantly a wall. So using wipeable paint in sort of high use areas. Boilers are a huge thing that constantly break. So I would think about getting the right boiler for the amount of people that you're going to have in the property. but also making sure that it is very well protected where it is, because we often in our buildings have boilers break because tenants are shoving their suitcases into the same cupboard that that the boiler is in, and then actually causing issues with it. Some of the other things that we always focus on is so appliances. So washers, dryers are the number one thing that constantly break. So when you're refurbishing, kind of buying the third up rather than the cheapest will save you constantly having to replace them. And then the last one that we do in all of our properties that are sort of not the sort of lowest is looking at doing complete sealing, so wet rooms for your bathrooms. So ensuring that if someone leaves the water on or constantly, I don't know, has baths and splashes everywhere, that you don't create a leak anytime around the bathroom. So we kind of do a full wet room seal in our bathrooms. So those are some ways you can reduce costs. Maybe Jamie, I'll let you talk about the sort of what will people pay more for.
Yeah, I think it's always it's a really interesting part because there's gross yield and net yield, and I think all the solutions Eliza's mentioned are really going to impact that net yield ultimately over the period of time of investment. I think one of the big impacts in the beginning when you're looking to achieve the highest yield at the start of your investment for when you're maybe renting it out is how that looks, and taking into account who the end user is and what they're really going to appreciate. Because I think the boilers, the floors, all of these aspects are really helpful for the landlord operationally over time. But sometimes the end user doesn't necessarily see the benefit of those. And it's having that hindsight. We know that a tenant will pay more money for something that they fall in love with, or they kind of buy a lifestyle sometimes, and that will initially improve your gross yield. And then over time, I think one of the most important factors is taking into account the operational expenses and understanding why you invested in that home in the first place. If you've got it for 10 or 20 years, you should be investing in those costs in the beginning, like the boilers, the flooring to prevent any of those expenses over time. So I think it's just the impact of that gross and net yield and understanding where the part of the refurbishment benefits it.
Can we just dive a little deeper into, so if I had to choose between things that reduce my costs or things that people will pay more, is the choice, how would I make that choice? Do I have to make that choice?
Great question. I think we might have different answers. I don't know who may want to go first on this. I mean, my opinion on it is it is determined for the reason of the investment itself and your position in the market. Ultimately, I believe you should actually, I'm going to go with Eliza on this one. I actually think you should invest in the home for longevity because it's these little problems which happen over time, boiler damage, poor flooring, which ultimately impact the quality of the home over a period of time. And that has a huge impact on gross yield. I'm going to be biased in terms of soft furnishings, furniture, and the way something looks aesthetically, because I deal with that end consumer every day, and that's what they fall in love with. No one falls in love with a combi boiler, but they fall in love with a sofa or something which really stands out. But as an investor, that costs money, and I know I'll get more money for that product. But at the same time, if you don't have the foundations of your investment in place, then no matter what you put in there to make it look pretty, it's behind the surface, it's still going to deteriorate over time. So yeah, I go with that part of look after the investment first, refurbish for a long period of time, and make sure the core principles of that refurbishment are there: your windows, your double glazing, your boiler, your gas, your electrics, and then look at the other stuff afterwards.
And it sometimes can also matter what your business plan is, right? If you know that you're flipping it, so you're buying it in a year's time, you're going to sell it, you just want a really great tenant in there, put in the rain shower, put in the fancy nest that makes people feel good. Some of the other things we've done is, do unique design details, like Jamie says, like the fancy couch and the, beautiful big plant, because your business plan is to get a great tenant in that will pay that price. And if you're then selling that on pretty quickly, some of those more long-term values might not be top of your list. Where if you're long hold, I'm biased towards that because I believe in that we all should have a long-term view on real estate, because it is a long-term asset, and doing things not with that view kind of I think long-term reduces the values of it. But yeah, it just matters. It totally depends on what your business plan is, I think, in terms of what you put in. Luxury mattresses are now a new thing that definitely people care about. You're like, this apartment has a Simba, and everyone's like, oh. So there's definitely kind of things that people really respond to. Yeah.
Okay. Jane, do you see specific things that people respond to in that excited way as Eliza just described?
Yeah, it's funny she's mentioned the mattress, because we've just developed our own range, and the understanding that it's the one piece of furniture which can affect the quality of your life, so it's becoming more and more as the industry, especially the BTR industry and the co-living industry talk about how, health and well-being so much. That piece of furniture, a mattress, can have a huge impact. So we're starting to see that again. For us, we get the biggest reaction from, how a space is designed, how it looks, how it's built for convenience. But, ultimately it's when you walk into that room and have that wow factor, and it's typically having a strong piece of sofa, an occasional chair, a nice big rug. It's amazing what a rug can do to a room in terms of bringing it together. And these things don't cost huge sums of money, so they don't have a big impact on your net yield, but they can have a very positive impact on that very beginning. So for me, the soft furnishings really help. But there's those pieces like a mattress, which they are not exciting pieces, when you talk about it. But from the landscape that we now work in and the way people think, especially over COVID, I think over time, comfort is huge. If you're going to be stuck in a home for a year, you want to be in a surrounding which you feel comfortable in. And I think that surrounding is so important. And that's why, I think the BTR industry has really set themselves apart, is because they've gone into it knowing that the home is, a huge part of someone's life, and it can have a huge impact on the way someone not just values financial reward, but they're actually getting a better living. So for me, the landscape, the visuals around you have a major impact, and there's a lot you can do on a minimal budget and a higher budget, and you do see a higher yield, the more you spend, but it's not linear. So there's definitely a part of that where, don't spend too much money on something which, again, I don't want to go too much into it, because I think some investors fall in love with a project and it becomes more of a passion than it is an investment. But that could be for a later topic as well.
That makes me want to pivot into our next question, which you kind of touched a bit base on already. What are the factors to keep in mind when setting your refurbishment strategy?
I mean, from my side, it's always having that strategy in place and sticking to it. I think there's no problem with pivoting later down the line. I think one of the biggest impacts, the reason why you invest, is understand what your primary investment sort of trigger is, understanding your budget and what you're looking to achieve. If you're looking to achieve a good yield over a long period of time, take into account the points like Eliza's already mentioned with regards to the boilers, the electrics, making sure everything is there. But don't go above a budget that you've originally set, and make sure it no longer becomes an investment. I think it's purely just setting that strategy in the beginning. If problems do come up, that's that happens in all investments. We see it more in this industry because we work in an industry where things, break or things are hidden behind walls. But as long as you stick to that strategy, you don't change it as you go, you don't fall in love with something and you want to keep it for yourself, ultimately you'll always come back with the investment that you originally came in with. And I think one of the biggest things about investing is, remember, it's a financial reason you're going into it. As much as it's sometimes a passion, it's to always make sure that at the end of it, it could be for capital growth, or it could just be for passive income. Understand the reason for investment, and ultimately, if you stick to your strategy, or if you need help with your strategy, look around you. Speak to the people that have already been doing this for a long period of time. There's so much information and education out there. It's something that we're very big into in terms of offering advice, because you can lose money very quickly in this industry, I think, if you don't have that strategy.
And can I dive a little bit deeper? Just for a second, because I was curious when you said, things can break and you have to react to it. So does this imply we should already plan ahead in the budget, like an allocation for things that are unexpected and will need repair?
I think I'm an investor myself. That I always have a margin for problems which come up. Ultimately, we wish they never do, but there's always a margin over maybe a 3 to 5 year period where there'll be a fund which I can dip into to say, okay, this is what I expected to happen. I think the unexpected, I think one of the biggest ones, you look at plumbing and you look at, electrics, we live in a world where a lot of investments done in older real estate, Victorian, Georgian, Edwardian. And a lot of what we're investing is hidden. You can't see it, and it's hard to test in the original stages. I think it's important to do your due diligence in the beginning as much as possible. I think that's a big element of it, to save those surprises. But having that little fun there and building that into your calculator in the beginning is going to be key to making sure that over time, as you mass a portfolio or whatever you're doing, you never have these surprises financially. You have them because they happen, but you're not frightened, and they no longer ruin your investment.
Yeah, I would add to that I think the sort of factors you should think about are who your future tenant is. So you kind of want to go, all right, in this location, in this kind of asset, we believe that this is going to be predominantly our target audience. And then, when you're creating that refurbishment budget, I would look at how you add the things your target audience will value and therefore will pay more for, right? So if I'm, building a build to rent asset for young professionals, what I'm going to put as, what I'm going to focus on is going to be very different if I'm building something that I know is actually going to be filled with young families, right? And same for smaller assets, 3 to 5 units assets, it's quite similar. So I would understand who I'm building for and then build my refurbishment strategy around that. And as well as understanding what my length of hold is, right? So what I would do if I was holding it for 2 years would be very different to what I would do if I was holding for 10 to 20 years.
So, Eliza, can I dive deeper there? Like, would that imply that I should think about my future tenants and the length of hold before I actually look at what I would buy if I make the investment in the first place?
Absolutely. So if you are at the acquisition stage where you are looking at an asset, and let's take an example, let's take something in the middle, 50 unit asset, on a high street or nearby a high street, let's say, you would look at what the neighborhood is, what kind of demographic lives there, right? If it's Brixton, you would assume it to be much more younger professionals versus, Kensal Rise. And you would kind of look at the demographics in that neighborhood, look at who is moving there, how is it being gentrified, and then create not only your spatial planning around that, but also your refurbishment strategy. So as an example, a 2-bedroom apartment that I'm building for young professionals would have equal size bedrooms and ideally 2 bathrooms, because you're expecting that to be a shared apartment. or allowing at least that flexibility. And you would focus on doing, you know, cooler design and really awesome furniture and things like that. Where if I was building a 2-bedroom apartment for a young family, one of the rooms would be smaller. There would be a lot of storage in that room because you're expecting a child in there. And if it was to be furnished, you would put very minimal furniture in the 2nd bedroom because you're assuming that there would be kids' furniture in there. And then all of the common room furniture would be really durable because you're expecting dogs and kids to be puking all over it. So just the way that you approach it and what you focus on and what your sort of top 10 on your list becomes very different. And same with a length of hold, right? Like if we continue looking at that 50-unit asset, if I was planning to refurbish it, fill it, and leave, what I would focus on is all the things that add value to my rents, right? So it's things that allow me to increase rents, where if I was looking to hold that for the next 20 years, I would focus a lot on making sure that nothing in that whole asset would cause me headaches for the next 20 years.
So like in many other areas, it's the 3 words: know your audience.
Always.
Jamie, did you want to add something there to this?
I completely agree. I mean, our philosophy at Loft is people first design. Ultimately, when you design something for the user, at the end of it, you can't really go wrong over a period of time. So I think I agree with everything that's just been said there. It's when you forget about the end user, you completely you'll be stuck with an asset which is just going to be hard to fill and also then hard to refill as well. So yeah, knowing that audience and location is so important. I think that's you mentioned earlier, sort of Brixton and Kensal Rise, and the demographics in the area change so much. It's such a key part of that strategy.
Okay, thank you. So there are a few questions that are coming in slide. I would like to take some, if you don't mind. And there's an interesting question, which is renting furniture better, giving the tenants the option to choose items of furniture and they pay to rent it? The landlord is not responsible for maintaining it.
It's a great question. It's been asked a lot in the industry at the moment. I think you've got some big players coming in. You know, John Lewis, famous for it, looking at renting furniture. It all comes down to first of all, it depends who you're talking to. As a tenant, if the asset is empty, then offering them that benefit is going to be a huge part to play. I think from an asset manager or from a developer, you know, if you're looking to achieve the highest yield, you'd probably be looking to furnish that asset to be able to, you know, that's proven that a furnished asset and that you are selling a lifestyle, not just a space. And I think the lifestyle generates a higher yield. But to get back on point in terms of rental furniture, I think it's a key part to offer. I think it's there's some flaws in it. I think the problem with rental furniture at the moment, there isn't a model which does it in a way where, you know, I think a lot of people think they'll rent furniture is going to be brand new every single time. And the issue is that's not a sustainable way of furnishing. It's because if someone rents something for 6 months, it's not a great way to then be able to then just get rid of that item, or, you know, it's very expensive to upcycle it. So there's some key factors in that business model that need to be looked at over time. Because I don't think, you know, speaking to tenants, we do a lot of research on this because it's a massive industry for us to look at. Is our tenants happy with secondhand furniture? That's not the answer. Isn't 100% yes, and then that impacts the rental model going forward. And of course, I don't want to get into the business model of rental furniture for ourselves because from ourselves, it's a key part of the business to make sure it's commercial. I mean, if you're an asset manager, it's easy to look at a rental furniture solution in the beginning, but over a period of time, it's hard to replenish. It's hard to then look at. So it's a great option. In a short answer, it's an option that should be there. It is more expensive, but if you're there short term and you're only there for a period of time and you don't know what your plans are, then absolutely, it's something that should be considered.
Can I add to that? In my experience anyway, from looking at it, because we've looked at it pretty deeply as well. Up to now, I haven't found anyone that's been able to do the rental model kind of inexpensively enough that it makes sense, because you, as a landlord, if you're going to rent it, then essentially it's better for you always to spend in capex than it is to spend a kind of month over month. And as a tenant, if your landlord says, hey, here's a great system, you can go pick your own furniture and rent it, and we're going to subsidize it or something, all of the kind of companies that I've vetted on that spectrum are just too expensive to actually lease all the furniture for a 1-bedroom apartment. You end up spending hundreds of pounds a month on that rent, and it just doesn't make sense. And so I agree with you, Jamie, that there's still kinks to work out, I think, in that business model. And the other thing I would add, which might be quite controversial to say, but I actually think that when an apartment is well designed, most people don't care if the couch is pink or blue. Like, as long as it's a nice couch and it's comfortable and it aesthetically all works together, most people are okay with what is there. I think the proportion of people that are very passionate about what kind of couch they have is actually quite small when you think about it. I think rental furniture sounds nicer on paper than it is in reality.
I think it's one of the, we live in an era now where, flexibility is a huge part of our everyday sort of buying power, and rental does offer it. I think ultimately that it's not a cheap way of doing it though, and I think it's not a niche audience because it's bigger than niche, but when you look at London's a famous demographic for it, there's a lot of people that will come here for 12 months to 24 months. And there's an argument to then suggest, well, it might be cheaper to rent furniture, but it is very expensive, to make the margins work for a company. And it's not just actual purchasing furniture, it's the logistics of getting it in and out, and also the damage it can cause to a property as well over time. So, as an asset holder, I always believe it's better to furnish it yourselves, and you're keeping that furniture there for 5 years. And the damages that go in and out because of furniture removals does impact, again, that yield. So I would always say buy, but there is a market. It's a very strange business model at the moment, which does need a lot of ironing out. And I think there's a huge impact on sustainability with it as well. But yeah, it's we're both in agreement, so no arguments.
So, Eliza, there is a question directed to you. What is the life cycle of the refurbishment? How often you refurb your properties?
Right. So, totally depends. It ranges, I would say, between 5 and 15 years. So, if you have a really nice finish and you've had lovely families or older couples living there, you can get away with it for a really long time. Some of our personal investments, we will do a repaint after almost every tenant, especially in the high use areas, and we will replace some furniture if it's furnished. But if the asset is unfurnished and has a medium to high quality finish, you can get away with sort of 8 to 10 years. And then it totally depends. If you have lots of furniture, it's getting, there's a lot of turnover of tenants. If it's more sort of younger professionals, we've found if it's bigger also, because you have people sharing the apartment, kind of renting per room. And then those you have to refurbish much more, sort of 5 to 7 years.
Okay. Talking about refurbishment, Jamie, there's a question addressed to you. What few examples do you have of property refurbishments rather than furnishings that tenants would pay more?
So what was the last part of that question? Sorry,
So I repeat the whole question.
Thank you.
What few examples do you have of property refurbishments rather than furnishings, the tenants would pay more for. So instead of the furnishings that we talked about, the tenants would pay.
Absolutely.
The tenants would pay more for.
I think that goes down to, you know, I said earlier at the very beginning, there's different grades of a refurbishment, different stages. I think we, you know, Eliza sort of commented on the foundations of that refurbishment in terms of, you know, those big key pieces. I think next that goes into a refurbishment is the decor, and that's not soft furnishings. That's how it looks in terms of paints on walls and flooring itself. So I think there's some great examples out there. You know, I think there's actually thousands of examples. If you look at a home after it's initially being let, after it's being, you know, completely not refurbished inside, but it's had a renovation, well, not a renovation even, it's been painted throughout, and you compare it to the photos of it a year before, the rental value that you see that you get an increase on, when you put the two together, and this has been tested quite a few times, and a lot of agents use this as a case study, you know, depending on which areas of the UK you're in, there's a percentage increase immediately in terms of just how it looks. I think your next steps there, you can improve the lighting. I think a lot of it actually comes down to if something is fresh and it doesn't have the scuffs on the wall and it's easy to come into, don't get me wrong, taking it to another level will always get you a higher yield. A lifestyle will always pay more than just the space itself. But the way you market that home as well could be just as important as what you've done with the refurbishment. But if it's not furniture, I would then be and it's not the core items in the beginning, I'd be looking at the paints and the flooring, keeping it neutral, not getting too personally attached to it. And that ultimately will still get you a higher yield than just, you know, buying an asset and then renting it back out. But I think on this, we're probably talking more about individual assets rather than, you know, talking about blocks, because you wouldn't just take a block and then re-rent it unless it was purely a case of, you know, you're buying that asset as a, you know, a portfolio, an ongoing portfolio. And then throughout that asset's life, you may look to refurbish it as tenants move out. So furniture is not the only way to get a higher yield. Ultimately, there's a lot of, you can see that on Rightmove today. You know, I think in London it's different, but over the UK, you've got about 50 to 60% of homes which are still unfurnished, and they still achieve high yields, depending on the market that you're in. But a home which does look amazing with new furniture in and marketed well will always achieve more, or it's not just about achieving more, but will offer you more tenants to choose from.
Jamie, I hate to interrupt, but we're coming to an end. We're running out of time.
Yeah, of course, sorry.
Get your take briefly on one question that might provide a bit of an outlook for the audience, which is what trends will impact how homes will be refurbished in the future?
I can add a couple of points to this. So very quickly, I think sustainability is going to play a much bigger part than it has in the past. You know, making sure it's double glazed windows that actually work. So insulation, you know, appliances that use, you know, reduced electricity and reduced water. There are grants out there to do some of these upgrades right now, because the city councils are also pushing for the refurbishments that are going on right now of older assets to really incorporate sustainability and making sure that we're using as little as possible of electricity and water. I think tech-enabled homes will become more and more normal as well. So having that ability to kind of change lights and temperatures and all kinds of things from your phone will become pretty normal. And I think that overall, and maybe this is me dreaming, the quality of homes is going to increase after COVID, because we're all just spending so much more time at home, and we will continue to spend more time than we did at home, right? Working 1 or 2 days a week from home or whatever that is for everyone. But I think that will, seeing our homes more and spending more time there is going to make us care more about the quality that we live in. So
thank you.
My very quick points.
Thank you for being quick, Jamie. Your quick points. We're out of time.
On that, I think sustainability is huge. I think that's probably one of the key points and key topics which trend in this industry and will continue to trend. I think we look at the data every day in terms of the way products are being looked at and searched throughout the whole of the market. Huge shift towards offices within homes and being working from home. So I think going forward in the future, that's going to still be a big trend more than ever. We see a lot of nature within homes at the moment. That's kind of, I think, again, that goes hand in hand with sustainability, but I also think that is sometimes a trend in itself, a design trend, and maybe not a trend within property. But at the moment, everything is kind of in the way the last year has impacted all of us. The way a home will look shape in the future is going to be very differently to the way we probably looked at it a year before. And I think ultimately it will come down to sustainability, quality of life within a home as well, and also that convenience. That's that space that you're in. If you can now start looking at it as not just a house or a property, but it's a convenience, it's a home. Let's take property aside. People want a home now. They don't want somewhere where it's just a bed or just a place. I think London's famous for it.
Yeah, I hate to interrupt, but we want to have a home now. Beautiful ending. Yeah. We have to come to an end. We're out of time. Thank you very much for joining. It was a very interesting session and very insightful. And for the audience, coming up next, we'll have 3 breakout sessions in which you can choose from. If you click on the session tab in Hopin, one will be getting repairs done fast. The other is creating local homes and mastering virtual viewings to third. And we'll be here back on the stage at 12:30 with a panel on green cities. So see you then. Thank you very much, Eliza and Jamie. Have a nice day. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.